Hello, everyone. My name is Richard Cassette, and it's my honor to be the SAGE Program Coordinator for Bedford Road Collegiate. I am going to be creating a series of videos that will introduce you to a number of facets of our SAGE program. And so you're going to get to know me quite well. I've been the SAGE Program Coordinator for the past 10 years, and I've really enjoyed my time in SAGE. I'm passionate about gifted students, passionate about what we do in the SAGE program. And so I'm really excited to be able to introduce you to the program via a series of videos, even though ideally we would all be together in person. So this first video is going to be an introduction to giftedness itself so that we can start to share some shared understandings around what giftedness means within our division, and of course, how that informs what we do in our classrooms. It's important to note as well, before we get into this, that the SAGE program arose about 35, 40 years ago out of an identified need in Saskatoon Public Schools to better serve the needs of those students who, while demonstrating significant intellectual potential and ability, were consistently underperforming or struggling with engagement in regular classrooms. So of course, I think our program has been designed to try and address some of those aspects that weren't necessarily being successfully addressed in the regular classroom setting. So here we go, off into the SAGE learner profile. I always like to start out with this first slide that differentiates for us between the bright child and the gifted child. But in doing so, it's really important that I preface this by noting that this is not a hard, rigid distinction between these two categories. It's better to think of it along a spectrum, or to think of it in terms of students or individuals may have differing abilities across differing subject areas. And so while the gifted child may lean more towards those items under the gifted column, just because you have a series of items under bright doesn't mean you aren't gifted, and vice versa. So it's more, or this tool is best thought of as a way to begin to ask yourself, especially for those of you who are students, to begin to ask yourself whether or not you see yourself best as bright or see yourself best as gifted. And this is certainly what your teachers would have been considering to a certain extent as they completed those referrals this year. So note that there are some things under the gifted child that we should certainly be mindful of, that the gifted child tends to be more inquisitive, curious, has a lot of questions that are probing and go beyond the surface, that reflect a strong prior engagement with content often, or that show some particularly creative and innovative thinking. Gifted children also tend to be a little bit more physically engaged in the learning process. You may see, physical signs of excitement in the learning process. And that comes from passion, right? A genuine love of learning. And gifted students tend to be a little bit more playful in class, playful with their learning. Although, again, that may not always be the case. Some of them are also very perfectionist or very concerned with their results. Gifted learners also tend to, this falls under that inquisitive category, they also may tend to question the answers as presented, and may begin to cycle down what we call the why well. Why is this the answer? Why this? Why that? Which can be very challenging, but also very rewarding as a teacher. Gifted children also tend to identify with or feel more of a sense of belonging with older peers, or even with adults who may be more equipped to respond to their intellectual speed and gifts. And because of those speed and gifts, gifted children can be bored. And this really lies at the root of one of the reasons why the SAGE program was created. But it's not that they're bored because they're not engaged by learning. It's that they may be bored because they already have a sense that they know the answers, and they're ready to do something more interesting and more creative with the work, rather than kind of the typical lower level thinking that we might associate with the beginnings of the learning process in a regular classroom. Lastly, we find that gifted children have a quite rich affective domain, meaning that they are strong, sensitive feelers, in terms of their process and their learning. They may be therefore highly critical of themselves or of others, and they may not engage unless they're intrinsically motivated. So that's an overview of the gifted child. Now, to start to break that down a little bit, and the next slides are based off of our SAGE curricula, we find that giftedness demonstrates itself across a range of intellectual abilities. And again, this is along a spectrum, so it's not an absolute, right? You may feel this way in some subject areas, and this may not apply in other subject areas, because we know that giftedness is not comprehensive. So number one, gifted students can be or tend to be highly knowledgeable in areas of interest, right? Speaking in ways that go beyond curricular expectations significantly, okay? Number two, they read or view, right? They take in material at a higher level and a higher speed of comprehension with greater fluency than their peers and with much more of a critical eye to detail. Number three, they're able to rapidly process and integrate new information into existing frameworks such that they can make these really exciting and innovative leaps across different lessons. So because of those things, as I mentioned a minute ago, SAGE students who are not in a SAGE program may therefore be frustrated by traditional, slower, perhaps more rote memorization styles of learning. Moving on, giftedness also demonstrates itself across a range of learning dispositions, right? So approaches and attitudes towards learning. Number one, we find that gifted students tend to display a strong ethical concern, even bordering on an idealism, beyond what we would expect. Number two, as a result of this, they may not conform to the norms. Rather, they're internally motivated by their ideals, and they're deeply curious and deeply creative about learning. They love nothing more than spending time going deep, deep, deep into things about which they are passionate. Number three, they tend to be interested in a range of divergent areas, or on the opposite end of that spectrum, they can get deeply, profoundly immersed in one or two areas of interest, such that, for example, I've encountered students coming into grade 9 who are already incredibly well-versed in things like quantum physics. Number four, they're highly self-motivated and incredibly persistent when engaged, but gifted students are not always engaged by what they're learning. So that can be both a great gift, but also quite a challenge in a classroom. And number five, once they are engaged, they tend to be able to work independently, completing tasks, completing the lessons, completing large assignments even very quickly and with incredible skill. And they will set very high standards for themselves and their work, again, when engaged and when motivated. Lastly, students who are gifted tend to demonstrate a range of needs, both academic and social, and these needs are quite unique and sort of help us to understand why SAGE is a special ed program and why their needs are best met within a congregated setting. So number one, academically, gifted students may have succeeded in their earlier years. If engaged and if working, they may have succeeded with very little effort at all, right? Meaning that they did not have to develop strong work habits. They could simply attend to the learning during class and then excel on the assessment tasks. Number two, because of that, once they get to more challenging material, they may need actually quite a bit of explicit instruction in how to develop and how to use those work and study skills that other students may have required earlier on in their journey. So number three, they may excel in interpersonal skills and emerge as great school leaders, though not always, but many gifted students do tend to be very gifted when it comes to getting along with peers and almost becoming a sort of magnet for their peers. On the other hand, we also find that a lot of gifted students tend to be very intrapersonally gifted, meaning they're very introverted and very reflective, very empathic and very sensitive to their peers. And they may be largely quiet and observant as a result, but then when asked, will share incredible insights into the world of those around them. And last, group work, because of all these things, group work for gifted students is both an incredible challenge and a wonderful opportunity for them to rehearse and build those skills. So certainly in the next video, where I'll be discussing how we accommodate for these needs in a gifted classroom, you'll see a great emphasis placed on group work. All SAGE learners, we believe, have the potential to both struggle and excel in our shared learning spaces. And so it's really not that SAGE is a one-size-fits-all model, nor is the regular classroom for that matter. It becomes all about how we're able to adapt and differentiate for these students and their unique needs. So in the next video, I will be discussing how we design our classroom and our learning spaces and our curriculum to accommodate for these needs. Thank you.